He signed his letters with a cryptic symbol. He threatened school buses. He claimed 37 victims and dared the world to stop him. But behind the ciphers and the symbols, behind the hood and hammer and blood, was a man. In part one, we followed the Zodiac's terror spree across California. 5 confirmed murders, taunting letters to newspapers, and a city paralyzed with fear. But in the decades since, another game has played out, one with its own cast of characters: amateur sleuths, codebreakers, journalists, detectives, and even internet obsessives, and maybe a podcaster or two, all chasing the question the Zodiac dared them to answer: who am I? This is part two. We'll take a look at the suspects, the theories, and try to find the truth, or what remains of it, after 50 years in the dark. Welcome back to the Midnight Mystery Archive. For decades, the search for the Zodiac Killer has swirled around a short list of suspects. Some were compelling, others almost too perfect. We begin with the most famous name of all, Arthur Leigh Allen. Arthur Leigh Allen was a former elementary school teacher from Viejo, dishonorably discharged from the Navy, fired from teaching for sexual misconduct, wore a Zodiac-style watch with the infamous cross-circle logo, was known to kill animals, obsessed with cryptography. Does that sound familiar? In 1971, a friend reported Allen to the police, saying he'd talked about wanting to hunt people and create a killer persona to terrorize the Bay Area. When detectives interviewed Allen, he admitted owning bloody knives, claimed they were from killing chickens. He mentioned bizarre fantasies, and he slipped up. He said the Zodiac wouldn't hurt children. But the police never said the killer had used that name. It was enough to keep him on the radar for decades. But here's the problem. Allen's fingerprints and handwriting didn't match the Zodiac's. He passed a polygraph. And after a 1992 raid of his home, which revealed bombs, weapons, and coded diaries, still nothing concrete tied him to the murders. In 1992, Allen died of a heart attack. The case grew colder still. Richard Gaikowski, a counterculture writer and former journalist for the Good Times newspaper in San Francisco. Some Zodiac followers claim his voice matched the Zodiac's phone calls. He had ties to areas near the crimes. He fit physical descriptions. A codebreaker and former friend even claimed Gaikowski once confessed to being Zodiac while drunk. But again, no DNA, no hard evidence, just circumstantial overlaps and lingering paranoia. Gary Francis Poste. In late 2021, a team calling themselves the Casebreakers claimed to have solved it. Gary Francis Poste, the deceased Air Force veteran, was the Zodiac. They cited scars on Poste's forehead matching the police sketch, alleged hidden messages in Zodiac ciphers spelling out his name, and a stash of evidence found in a dark room Poste once owned, supposedly tying him to the letters. But law enforcement didn't bite. The FBI publicly denied that the case was closed. The San Francisco Police Department reaffirmed the Zodiac investigation remains open. Ross Sullivan, another favorite in the Zodiac theory circuit. He worked at the Riverside City College Library, where the Sherry Jo Bates murder occurred in 1966, a possible early Zodiac victim. He vanished after the crime. He was a recluse, wore army boots, had a military haircut, and was deeply into codes. Though no physical evidence linked him, and his mental health history was fraught, the timeline and behavioral profile made him a person of interest, especially in amateur sleuthing communities. But there's a problem with all of these potential suspects. Each one has a few chilling overlaps, but always one thing missing. What is it? Proof. The Zodiac was careful, maddeningly so. His ciphers may contain red herrings. His taunts were designed to distract. And worst of all, he may have stopped killing just as the net began to close. Or he may have never truly been found. The Zodiac didn't just kill people. He built a brand, a cryptic, terrifying persona that lived in shadows and in ink. And long after the murders ended, the myth only grew louder. For decades, amateur sleuths, codebreakers, and FBI analysts tried to crack the Zodiac's infamous Z340 cipher, a 340-character code sent to the San Francisco Chronicle in 1969. But it wasn't until 2020 that a breakthrough came. An international team, David Oranchik, Sam Blake, and Jarl Van Eyck, used custom software and linguistic pattern recognition to finally unlock the message. The decrypted texts? I hope you are having lots of fun and trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber. The letter mocked the police, ridiculed the notion of justice, and doubled down on the Zodiac's desire to be remembered. But even after all of that, there was still no name. The cipher was content without conclusion, a taunt, but not a confession. The internet was a blessing and a curse for the Zodiac case. On one hand, it gave rise to communities like ZodiacKiller.com, the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit, and countless YouTube channels and blogs. Users dissected every letter, every cipher, every potential suspect. Some developed entire timelines and suspect theories more detailed than law enforcement files. But with that came chaos. Thousands of conflicting interpretations, red herrings, hoaxes, and wild speculation. People began seeing Zodiac connections everywhere they looked. Unsolved murders across the US, theories that the killer moved to New York, even suggestions that he worked for the military or law enforcement. One popular claim that the Zodiac worked in intelligence and used knowledge of encryption beyond what any civilian would know. Others believe he faked his death, or that he never existed at all, and the letters were written by more than one person capitalizing on a wave of violence. In recent years, advances in forensic genealogy, like those that caught the Golden State Killer, brought new hope. Investigators tested the Zodiac's stamps and envelopes, but decades of contamination and degradation made it difficult. While some DNA profiles have been extracted, none have led to a definitive match. And unlike the Golden State Killer, Zodiac didn't leave behind enough high-quality biological evidence to build a full family tree. The Zodiac remains just beyond the reach of even modern science. Over the decades, hundreds of people have confessed to being the Zodiac. Some were seeking attention, others were mentally ill, a few were possibly attempting to protect the real killer. In 1998, a man named Dennis Kaufman claimed his stepfather, Jack Terrence, was Zodiac. He presented a hood, rolls of film, and a military background. The FBI dismissed it. In 2009, the History Channel ran a special proposing Earl Van Best Jr., based on circumstantial family ties and handwriting similarities. That theory, too, was heavily debated and ultimately dismissed by most experts. The Zodiac was either still alive and silent, dead and undiscovered, or, as some believe, never one person at all. The Zodiac case helped birth the modern concept of the citizen detective. It inspired TV shows, books, podcasts, forums, even David Fincher's film Zodiac in 2007 reignited interest, especially among a new generation. The cipher became a kind of Rosetta Stone of true crime, something that everyone from software engineers to language experts to puzzle fans believed they might be able to crack. It blurred the line between mystery and game, between horror and hobby, and in doing so, it created something darker, a widespread obsession. The Zodiac Killer's identity may still be unknown, but the number of suspects has long outgrown the file folders of any one police department. Some names dominate the headlines, but others, quieter, stranger, and in many ways just as plausible, still haunt the margins. Let's step into the gray zone of this case, the nearly forgotten, the possibly credible, and the theories that won't die, because maybe, just maybe, they contain a sliver of truth. Don Chaney, the man who accused Arthur Leigh Allen. He was the original accuser of Arthur Leigh Allen. He told police that Allen had described a fantasy about killing people and signing letters to the press. But years later, some began to question Chaney himself. He was intelligent, he had a technical background, and may have had personal motives for framing Arthur Leigh Allen. Some internet sleuths even suggested he matched the Zodiac's psychological profile more closely than Allen did. Was Chaney pointing the finger as a way to deflect attention? There's no real evidence tying him to the crimes, but there are whispers. Another persistent theory is that the Zodiac was more than one person. Proponents point to changes in writing styles across letters, differences in physical descriptions given by witnesses, variations in behavior. Some attacks were up close and personal, others distant and calculated. Could it be that Zodiac was a shared persona, a terrifying idea that the symbol and letters weren't just from one man but from a small, tightly kept circle? A cabal of killers hiding behind a single name. Generally speaking, law enforcement rejects the theory, but online forums and amateur sleuths have kept it alive. The Zodiac's knowledge of cryptography, codes, and even ballistics has led some to believe he had military training. Several suspects were ex-military: Allen, Poste, others who were never publicly named. One theory even goes further, that the Zodiac may have worked for or been protected by government intelligence agencies. Of course, there is no hard proof, but coincidences exist. Handwriting experts have pointed out similarities between Zodiac's writing and military training manuals. One cipher, the Z13, uses a format consistent with CIA one-time pad encryption. If true, it might explain how he stayed one step ahead. The Zodiac wasn't just a killer, he was a performer. This is another thought. Many of his letters reference literature, especially The Mikado, a Gilbert and Sullivan opera. Some theorists believe the Zodiac was a failed writer or English professor, using murder as his twisted form of authorship. Each letter was a story, each murder a chapter. A few have even suggested known authors were involved, though these claims are unsubstantiated and often derided. Still, the linguistic complexity of some ciphers and the deliberate theatricality of the letters suggests a man obsessed with being read, not just feared. By 1974, the Zodiac letters had stopped. Or did they? Some investigators believe he continued to write, just under new names or with altered patterns. Other murders, like the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, were briefly investigated as potential Zodiac connections, but nothing stuck. The official tally remains 5 confirmed victims, possibly more, likely more, but officially, that's where the trail ends. As time passes, new theories emerge, old suspects die, technology improves, and yet, the more we know, the less clear it all becomes. Zodiac isn't just a killer now, he's a mirror reflecting the fears, fascinations, and obsessions of every generation since 1969. But we want answers. We also want the chase. For most killers, the story ends with an arrest, or a trial, or a grave. But the Zodiac, he's still here, not necessarily in body, maybe not even in name, but in echo. Police files from San Francisco, Napa, and Viejo remain open, aging in cabinets marked pending. The case is technically active, but no longer prioritized. Detectives who once followed the trail have retired. Suspects have died, evidence has degraded, and yet every few years, something reignites public interest. A decrypted cipher, a new suspect theory, a film, a podcast. The fire never quite burns out. The Zodiac case didn't just influence true crime. In many ways, it defined it. He weaponized the media, preying on the public's thirst for spectacle and the police's desperation for clues. He gave birth to the modern trope of the killer with a signature, not just through method, but through message. Long before social media, the Zodiac knew how to go viral, and in doing so, he blurred the line between violence and performance. There's no question that the case of the Zodiac took a psychological toll. Some detectives on the case burned out. Others developed tunnel vision. A few destroyed marriages, friendships, or even their own credibility chasing one suspect for decades. Likewise, for amateur sleuths, the Zodiac became an obsession. Entire lives have been spent decoding, theorizing, arguing in forums. It's no longer just about solving a murder. It's about solving a puzzle without that final piece. Will we ever know who the Zodiac is? Will DNA one day crack the case like it did the Golden State Killer? It's possible. Will some long-lost letter, fingerprint, or confession emerge? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe the Zodiac was ordinary, and it's only the not knowing that made him monstrous. Because what makes a ghost linger isn't death, it's unfinished business. He called himself the Zodiac. He signed his name in symbols. He promised more victims and more ciphers, and then he vanished. But what do you do with a mystery that refuses to stay in the past? You archive it, you examine it, and if you're brave, you step into the shadows and ask the question again. Who was the Zodiac Killer? And if he's still alive, is he listening? This is the Midnight Mystery Archive. A reminder, new episodes every Tuesday, every Friday. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts. And now, find us on TikTok as well. Until next time.